One has to get Mr. Bones' ducks assembled in a row so that we know what's going on. Mr. Bone was accused of bullying and of flashing to one of his assistants. Well, this seems to be in something. There seems to be in some history of bedroom encounters in the Mr. Bone biography, and I'm sure it'd be very interesting when he ends up doing an autobiography. At the moment, he doesn't need to do an autobiography. He's got somebody to hand who can do that for him. But it strikes me as extraordinarily bizarre that, given the squalid allegations about bullying, now there are squalid allegations about preferential treatment, and the idea that Mr. Bone has been giving somebody a hand, or maybe she's been giving him a hand. I don't know. Well, let's have a look at the details of this thing, because given the fact that the allegations of the bullying against Mr. Bone stem from a bedroom incident, it seems a bit rich that his replacement is similarly a person who emerges from a bedroom encounter. Maybe she has her own virtues, and maybe I'm giving away her virtue too lightly, and maybe she has more to offer than simply a hand in the bedroom department. But it's also it's faintly bourgeois-esque, isn't it? And it's squalid. Squalid. And the fact that Mr. Sunak has been forced to bend over to accommodate Mr. Bone, that won't be the first time that expression has been used, makes the current Prime Minister look even weaker than he has looked for much of the last year. But I think this is extraordinary. It's giving Mr. Bone the opportunity to keep his hand in. So this afternoon there was a competition, and we know that this particular person was in the running. Helen Harrison was selected as the candidate to replace Peter Bone. Helen Harrison's great advantage, I suspect, is that she was rogering Peter Bone in the absence of his wife. Helen Harrison came to hand. And so therefore she beat Tom Mercer and Dr. Beatrice Brandon, who I suppose hadn't had so much of a hand in Peter Bone's constituency to that point. It's a controversial choice. It means that Miss Harrison presumably had a firm recommendation from the previous incumbent, who's resigning in disgrace, and presumably Peter Bone openly supported Miss Harrison following his suspension for sexual misconduct. So he had a hand in her selection. There's a lot of hands going on here. I suspect they must have got some sort of advice from Liz Truss, who is adept at giving people a hand. And until recently, Helen Harrison had worked in Mr. Bone's constituency office alongside his wife, Mrs. Bone, the former Mrs. Bone, Jenny Bone, who was regularly mentioned in the chamber of the House of Commons. Jenny Bone is also a Northamptonshire Council member. Miss Harrison, Helen Harrison, is a former physiotherapist, so very good with hands, and went to Our Lady and Pope John Roman Catholic High School in Corby, and she grew up in Laxton. Well, I know the area quite well. It's just down the road from me. And Corby is the... well, it's not quite Kettering, is it? I mean, I think... But I know people who went to this school of Our Lady and Pope John, and she also is a former East Northants councillor before being elected to the NNC in 2001. She was the council's executive member, so not only hands but members here for adults' health and well-being. So she's gone on terribly well, hasn't she? And at her selection meeting was the Mr. Bone's friend, MP Tom Pursglove, and other members of the Northants Council executive, as well as Mr. Bone's wife, all very cosy. It's quite it's quite an indulgent assembly, isn't it? And there had been previous concern raised about the influence of the local MPs on the council, with allegations apparently of political interference between the council and the MP, Mr. Bone, and I don't quite know how this works, but the leader, Jason Smithers, had appointed two women who work for two Conservative MPs representing the Northampton district as members of his 10-member executive council. Councillor Helen Harrison was appointed to the authority's biggest portfolio, adult social care, and there were questions. Now, this meant that she got an extra £40,000 salary for her role as a senior parliamentary assistant to Peter Bone. I must say, I'm not entirely happy with the idea of councillors who have a cosy relationship with the incumbent MP sliding into his seat as easily as they slid into his bed. I don't think this is the right way forward for democratic selection. This is democratic selection by some sort of by some sort of sexual selection, and it doesn't sound good, does it? It sounds like something out of the Roman Empire or the Byzantine Empire. Not something that one should be slapping across the pages of the Daily Telegraph or the Times, or indeed the Daily Mail. I'm sure the Sun would love it, and I'm sure that Harriet Harrison, like Harriet Pentland, who's the parliamentary assistant for Corby's MP Tom Pursglove, I'm sure they're sort of without. I was going to say without stain on their character, but I'm sure there are a few stains that they could probably clear up here and there. But it doesn't come across well, does it? It just doesn't come across well. Now, Tom Pursglove seems a perfectly nice lad, and indeed I did meet lots of these people when I was myself moving in these circles, and I certainly didn't. It certainly didn't seem to me to be as sordid as it seems now. But Andrea Leadsom, who's not just down the road, she had her own little problems with tax and with sums of money being paid hither and thither, which seemed to help oil the way towards getting a seat. And it sort of begs the question, what does it take in this country now to get a seat or get selection for for an election to Parliament? What does it take? Because judging by Helen Harrison's selection, some rather vulgar thoughts come into my mind, and I don't think those are worthy really of the Conservative Party or indeed the House of Commons. But I would welcome your comments. I feel a bit sort of worried here when all this fuss was going on about the council and about the councillors getting a bit too cosy with the sitting MPs. Though I don't suppose Mr. Bone has done a great deal of sitting, the leader of the Labour opposition, whose name is Jean Addison, said it feels a bit incestuous. frankly, it feels faintly orgiastic. All these people slipping in and out of the selection process. As I say, what does it take to be selected? There were questions like who is running the council, and Councillor Smithers, who sounds as if he's stepped out of a book by Agatha Christie. Councillor Smithers was regularly seen in conversation with both Peter Bone and Pursglove, and he seemed to have a very cosy relationship, but clearly not as cosy as Harriet Harrison. Unless I've misjudged something. And then it's not just that these councillors are buddying up and doing favours for the MPs. They all seem to be married to each other as well. There's Councillor Graham Lorman married to Councillor Lorna Lorman, who's the chair of Decency and Standards Committee. She's the chair of the Democracy and Standards Committee. And Councillor Andy Mercer is married to Councillor Jill Mercer. Are there any others? Oh, Councillor Wendy Brackenbury, who chairs the Scrutiny Committee, and her husband David has been appointed as chair of the Strategic Planning Committee. Councillor David Jenny and his wife Barbara are serving on the authority together with Mrs. Jenny, appointed as vice chair of the Employment Committee. Deputy Leader Helen Howell, another Helen, has the Sports, Leisure and Culture brief, and is the partner of Councillor Lee Wilkes. It's like a sort of family get-together, isn't it? Not everybody is, of course, married, but everybody seems to be very cosy. Oh, and just so we don't forget, this is Helen Harrison next to Mr. Bone, who has been so helpful in her selection process. Grooming her, maybe, is perhaps the opposite verb. But look, he looks so happy. He's found a way to keep some sort of hand on the tiller, so to speak. Or maybe she's doing that. There's a face we're not going to forget. I know our thoughts are on other parts of his anatomy, but as indeed I'm sure his current partner will be focused on so much of Mr. Bone as she stands for election to Parliament. And apparently the deal was struck that if Helen Harrison was not selected to be a candidate, an official candidate by the Conservative Party, then Mr. Bone would run as an independent and score a victory undoubtedly over Jen Kitchen for Labour, Anne Savage Gunn for the Liberal Democrats, Will Morris for the Green Party, and Ben Habib for Reform UK, after Richard Tice said that he wasn't going to be standing anybody in Reform UK because it wasn't worth doing so, because it was because this Parliament doesn't have very much time to run. Oh, is it that, or is that the latest by-election? I think that's the latest by-election, Skidmore's. Skidmore, of course, will have a by-election in a couple of weeks' time, or maybe a month's time, and Skidmore, of course, will have an even shorter space of time, or whoever replaces Skidmore will have an even shorter space of time to run in the constituency, which means it's not worth Reform's efforts. But they are going to put in Ben Habib here. I wish Ben Habib well. And Anna Savage Gunn for the Liberal Democrats. We have to remember the Liberal Democrats' extraordinary service to the post office. And so there you are. There you are, Mr. Bone. Mr. Bone could well find himself back in a parliamentary office assisting Helen Harrison, probably doing her secretarial work. in the absence of anybody else. I mean, just keep it a monk, keep it in the family, or at least in the bedroom.